we're continuing with global local politics. Several people are coming in now. If you've recently joined the class, all the sessions are on YouTube from last week. Two sessions just last week, but they're both on YouTube thanks to our excellent video Hollywood extension here. And they're waiting, and we'll continue the same way through the class. And this originated when there was a bad flu epidemic. We want to keep you healthy in the winter, and you don't have to come to class ever. You can watch on the plane, watch anywhere else, and the videos are there. But please don't come to class with any coughs or germs. So we're trying to keep everybody here healthy. We're going back and forth between multiple themes, some of which I put on the board in the last two sessions, and I'm adding a couple of new elements this year to incorporate our increasing incorporation of elements, especially from China. So as I've said, we use three main examples: U.S., France, and China. And chosen deliberately to illustrate big variations in some of the national-local relations, some of the globalization themes, and issues of inequality and the like, which have been variously raised in these sections, and with the increasing also attention to egalitarianism, human rights, and other issues. So I'm bringing those in a more explicit way. This time, and I'm going to try some things out, and look forward to discussion with you about these. So what we've got are some core readings from the past, starting from Adam Smith and Marx and the like. Then where and how these get more complicated when we have the rise of socialism and communism, especially in Russia and China. But let me just, I'm mentioning that to give you a sense of, let's watch for what Marx said, what Lenin said, what's going on, or what Adam Smith said at the beginning, and then how these relate to rural, urban, urbanization, and local issues in neighborhoods in China today, as well as elsewhere. That is, we work with 5 active Chinese teams, and they're meeting among each other. One of their big issues is still rural-urban, because they're neighborhoods in the big cities that are more connected to the rural areas, and where and how to handle these is a major policy issue in China right now. It's not 19th century, it's contemporary urban issues, as well as rural, of course. Okay, let's go back to Adam. We'll start with Adam Smith. Adam Smith, there are more economists, more economic students registered in this class than any other field. So we got 30 of you. 30 of you should know Adam Smith line by line. Okay. We take the first. The book is called "The Wealth of Nations." What's the cause of the wealth of nations? Division of labor. Okay, here we go. Let's put some of this up here. Division of labor leads to wealth. Okay. How can you increase the division of labor? If we think of big and small countries, big and small neighborhoods, big and small farmers, what can lead to more division of labor and more wealth? Yes?
Specialization.
Just a little louder.
Specialization.
Specialization, yes, but now the division of labor, that's really an intermediary. Specialization, because division of labor can lead to, or it's part of, it's not a separate cause. Specialization and division of labor go together. You break up the big jobs, and instead of saying you do one person makes everything in an automobile, you have thousands of people who do little specialized parts. Okay, What else increases division of labor, specialization, and wealth? Yes?
I think it's an amalgam of essentially three things that create more effectiveness. So, like dexterity.
No, what's the first?
Dexterity.
Dexterity.
Yeah. Saving time.
Saving time.
And the implementation of proper machinery.
Implementation of
proper machinery.
Proper machinery. Okay. Okay. These are good. They're all there, but they're in a sense they're how does this work? If we look for something over here, what might there be at the national level or a regional or bigger level, city level? Think of global, local politics. We're comparing, say, Manchester in the 18th century. We're comparing Manchester with Birmingham, with small rural towns in England. What was there, and then the same thing in other countries. What was there over here that might have led to more of this or less of this?
More trading routes. Ports.
More, okay, so trade, yes. But if we have more trade, trade means, I think in your words, international trade. Okay, so yes, I mean, so certainly that's one factor. But why might there be more or less international trade? In, say, in Spain or England or today in, say, North Korea or Iran. And that is that there are hot issues going on right now. I mean, Trump is trying to use trade very actively in ways that match with what Adam Smith talked about. How are Trump's policies of changing trade with people who he doesn't like or policy doesn't like relating to, how do they fit with Adam Smith?
The government can either open up ports or establish trade treaties.
Okay, so yes, so trade, international trade, more than these things. These are more local and specific and firm specific. But when you get to, can you sell your little machinery in England to someone in Spain or Italy or not? That is, can you export it and then can you import it? And Smith wrote a lot about this. And Smith really, and so what, you know, I don't want to answer yes. I'm trying to ask anybody else remember, read there. But so I'm mentioning here government. What other government policies? You mentioned openness. What's the converse of openness that Smith talked about, and that Trump is using, discussing in negotiations with China right now? Yes.
Like sanctions and tariffs.
Exactly. So governments can use sanctions, punishment, tariffs, and even quotas. You know, you can only import so many cars or so many of this or that. So these are used today, and they can be used as specific sanctions for Trump is trying to do this very specifically, which is unusual. You know, but the point is, do they work? Work is a tricky question, and so if let's say they are in use actively today, whether or not they have the intended or unintended consequences. Do they increase the wealth of everybody? Very complicated question, because we've got many direct and indirect kinds of things going on here. But I'm trying to bring in at least some of the bigger issues from the theory and the dynamics of this. This is not just Adam Smith. This is really 2+ centuries of economic theory and data analysis and so forth, which informs many of these debates today. and then second, how these are being revised or used in different ways by some of these populist leaders like Trump and And well, it's new in a sense. Trump is acting within a generally so-called liberal, laissez-faire, market-oriented political and economic system in the U.S. Europe is a little more socialized, socialist, especially France, but very different from China. So if we get to China, we've got a strong state where this is a long traditional policy, but the state, even within China, the state does not do everything. That is, the state, what happened when the Berlin Wall went down? The Berlin Wall, from the Russian standpoint, the Berlin Wall went down because the East Germans said, okay, you know, we can go into West Germany, we can go back and forth, and the Russian or the East German troops will not prevent us from crossing. Okay, 1989. What happened domestically in China in 1989, the same year? Got lots of Chinese here. Yes? The Tiananmen Square movement was the same year that the Berlin Wall went down. This was a major domestic revolution which we are still living with today. It said we want a more open society. And so the Chinese society, okay, so with that pressure, what was the immediate reaction inside Russia, I mean, to simplify a little bit, inside Russia and inside China? I mean, in simple terms, what did the Russians do, what did the Chinese do? Okay, the Russians basically said, we're going to open our economy to the world. You can call it capitalism or mixed or openness or whatever. And we will open our political system to democracy and have much more open political processes. Basically, the Chinese said, we will follow the Russians in the economy, but not in the political system. And that's the simple summary. So basically, the Chinese have had a more market-oriented economy increasingly since 1989, but within the political system, it's been slowly changing, opening up in ways that are more complicated and difficult to capture. But these are not black and white. These are continuous, problematic, subtle differences. and we'll come back to them as we go through different dimensions of these in the course. But the point I'm making now is that these examples I'm using with Trump or with China and Russia are important conceptually to see how do these things fit together. And Adam Smith's take was, you should be open politically and economically, at least in terms of, I mean, he didn't care about human rights. He was writing let me qualify. In this book on the Wealth of Nations, he did not write about human rights. He wrote other books about happiness and so forth. He was a moralist. He was a general political philosopher of the so-called Scottish philosophers who had a major impact on sort of Western thinking. But in this book, talking about the wealth of nations, his main concern was tariffs, limitation of trade. And the major driving concept behind all of these was what? In Smith's words, and in terms of his thinking, which captures almost all the examples I've just given you. What was his big concept, which is close to the rest of the course, infuses the rest of the course?
Laissez-faire government.
Yes, that's the basic answer, but what was his term for laissez-faire government? And what generated laissez-faire government and economics? What generates a laissez-faire economy that becomes larger, more successful, more wealthy, and affects more people? A little louder?
The invisible hand.
I can't hear you.
The invisible hand.
That's to say it happens in ways that are not so visible, but what is it?
Stand with the market.
Here we go. Louder. Someone just said it, but too quietly, I think. Just say it again loud. Said something about the market?
No, I did.
Free market? Free
Okay.
market capital?
What was his term? Did he say free? Free is too vague. Free is like open, but his slightly more specific term, you should all know because it's the first word in the title of this course. Okay. It wasn't quite his term. He had a different term, but it's what we call today globalization. What did he call it? Really, or the linking to globalization. All right. 30 economists get an E. I have to say that because we had 20 economists in the last quarter. Nobody could answer E. Okay. The extent of the market. Okay. Adam Smith. Okay. The extent of, and this is also written up in the syllabus. Nobody's read the syllabus closely, or you would have known it from the syllabus. Okay. And you have it in your notes, then really kick yourself. All right. Extent of the market is the big concept. And so what does that say in a contemporary context, or for him then? Have lower tariffs. Do not restrict trade. Make the trading partners be bigger and broader, ideally globally. International trade is the major driver of wealth for everyone. That's Adam Smith's argument. Does Donald Trump say that? No. Or that is most neoclassic, say most American, most European economists will say Donald Trump is completely out to lunch when he says we should have, we should restrict trade, we should restrict immigration, we should withdraw, that the U.S. at least should withdraw from these international economic agreements. Basically, the degree to which he's doing this, most economists will say this is completely wrong, and they have in mind this. They're saying, Adam Smith said, don't do that. Keep the tariffs low, trade, so in the negotiations between Trump and President Lee in China, who has said this more openly at least in the public releases, the press discussion, the efforts to build public opinion and support? Who's taken this position? Trump? No. So who's taken the position? President Lee. China is taking the Adam Smith position on this. Okay, so I'm trying to make these explicit and link them back to the past, in part because globalization is a messy field, and Saskia Sassen in her major statement, as well as Thomas Friedman, as well as, let's say, those two. These are two bestseller books, and they do not make these distinctions explicit. They mush them all together, and they don't really look at the roots. And that is, to put simply, Sassen includes Adam Smith plus Marx, to simplify, or Adam Smith in a Marxist tradition. But she doesn't cite either one, and she doesn't discuss the conflicts in different points between the theories and the evidence and what's going on. I'm trying to do that explicitly here, and I'm taking a little more time to make this very, take the words of Smith, because some of this is now ironically reversing itself from what you might think. I mean, to have the Americans saying, we want tariffs and we're going to use these as sanctions, and the Chinese say, we need free trade. From a communist leader, he's so-called. I mean, his party is the Communist Party. That's pretty ironic. Okay. Okay. One more point I'll just mention briefly, and we'll come back a little more. Where was there class conflict in Adam Smith? which are the conflicting, this is not in the first section, so this, we're relying if you read further on in the book. Okay. Basically, there's conflict in classes. There are classes and class conflict between manufacturers, capitalists, and owners. The owners of farmers, that is, agricultural leaders and owners, big farmers, and then workers who may be, in other societies they would call them peasants. They were really not peasants in England at that time. And then manufacturing workers. So we can say they're, in a sense, I'm pointing these out because this sounds like Marx, but did Marx talk about farmers and peasants fighting in the 19th and 20th century? No. Okay, we'll come back to that in a minute, but keep this in mind as a nagging question in your mind. How do we join these different pieces of theory and history of what causes what and where and why? Okay. All right, just to go through some of the core ideas. Thomas Friedman. As I said, this is the bestseller book that brought globalization to Main Street. Great anecdotes. He's a terrific journalist. He has a good pen and the like. He's got all kinds of videos about how this works and lots of computer lingo and sort of saying, you know, we had version 1, version 2, especially driven by software and hardware. So the world is flat came from a quotation of an Indian engineer who'd been in Silicon Valley, gone back and forth, and the Indians have built a very powerful, high-level technical area, and they pay a bit less, but in terms of international wages, in terms of with domestic Indian wage, they pay very high salaries to people who are there. And they're internationally competitive. More than that, they win the contracts away from many American and European competitors. Why? Answer, the world is flat. We're doing a better job, cheaper, faster. You know, if we get medical records from a hospital and they want to have them back in 10 minutes, 5 minutes, you know, we'll get them back in 5 minutes. We can get a medical diagnosis, we can get hospital, you know, all kinds of things. They even have, I mean, things like you put in your order in McDonald's, you drive your car around a little bit more, and your order comes out. Does that happen from people inside that one little building? They often send the order far away, and someone presses a couple of buttons, and it comes out. But that kind of globalism, I mean, it's not just. It may be global. It may be a McDonald's in Chicago. It may be that someone is pressing the buttons in Alabama or somewhere else. But the point is, these things are increasingly through new technology, and that is, it's the technology that's stressed by Friedman. Friedman leaves out many other things. So he. For instance, he calls the technology and the related rules that make the technology work the golden straitjacket. Okay, golden straitjacket. That sounds the opposite of Adam Smith. I mean, Adam Smith is basically saying, be open and free, do whatever works. Thomas Friedman is saying, you can't really compete unless you do it this way. The golden straitjacket idea in that sense is closer to Western individualistic market economy in terms of national government policy. That's what he basically means. You can't have high tariffs. You can't have strong regulation. You can't even have too strong unions or environmental or social service kinds of policies. If you try to do too much of that, you'll mess up the And so for that reason, some people call this neoliberalism. We'll talk about that because that's a loaded term. But the point is it focuses narrowly on the economy and does not incorporate the social elements in a coherent way, such as human rights, etc. Okay, Thomas Friedman. Friedman also is a journalist. He has a couple of quotes from a physicist who says, the world is messy and complicated and we really can't use a theory. So basically, Friedman is an anti-intellectual, and let's say anti-knowledge. He doesn't say I have a theory the way Adam Smith. I mean, Adam Smith has a clear theory. It's the core of psychology, economics, lots of work. And so you can then say this theory says, at least if the theory is right, then this ought to follow. With Thomas Friedman, no such thing. He's got a little bit of technology, but he basically is an anti-theory person. Of saying academics, knowledge, research, it's all, the world is too complicated. In a sense, it leads to a postmodernist perspective, which you have more in literature. But nevertheless, his big themes are globalization, competition, the world, and so if the world is flat, and you can have people in India getting contracts from American hospitals or Swiss hospitals, people then have said, well, is the world really flat? How much does the income or the linkage globally of people in Indian villages or Chinese villages link them to the rest of the world? And Friedman's answer in the book, I mean, he's been in lots and lots of talk shows, videos. Anybody seen him or heard his answer to that big question? How applicable is the world is flat metaphor? How applicable is that to poor people in small, less educated villages in China or India? What's his answer? I'm only talking about 5-6% of the Indian population. I'm ignoring 95% of the Indian population. I'm ignoring 95%. I'm only talking about the internationally competitive, technologically advanced cities and engineers and firms. Okay. And he's very frank and open about it. So in that sense, don't fault him for saying he's, that everybody in all the villages in China and India are, the same as everybody else. He's only talking about a very small elite. Okay. This also relates to current, that is, it's all, well, okay, I won't extend it yet to inequality, but there are debates which are also going on right now among political party candidates, among economic and social theorists about what generates inequality. And the answers are messy because there are many different possibilities, but at least here we have elements of this coming in. Okay, for the moment, and we'll continue with this, but for now, let me push on to the next reading, which is Bashkin. So Bashkin's big point, I'm not going to dwell on so much right here now, as I really have done that last week. That is, the big point of Bashkin is, which I've extended here and we'll extend through the course, is that globalization is many different things, and they may conflict with each other. They lead in different ways, they have different consequences. So one way we showed it was with, this is what sociologists sometimes talk about as, I put the word up here, cytuses. These are different cytuses, and so you can talk about them in terms of the economy, the political system, culture, leisure, human rights. I mean, we can put lots of things there, and then say How can we rank them in terms of expertise, sophistication, status, how they're looked at by others? Do they get more money or less money? Do they have to have a certain amount of educational background or training, etc.? And how do these different linkages and things connect? How do these things connect to one another? And then how do these in turn feed into something like this? So I'm giving you the elements of how globalization works with these other dynamics, these other sections of the course. But rather than trying to say there is one right answer, or even to try to fill in for you a huge matrix, what I'm trying to do here is for you to say, these are the pieces, this is the framework, these are the dynamics with all these little cells and these little causal linkages. In order to answer how these things work and how globalization operates, to really understand and have knowledge to answer that, we need answers to all these paths and all these questions. How much does this economic dynamic link to the political system via tariffs or via sanctions or via quotas or via something else? And if we look, say, to the models that people have done of gross national product, when Keynes wrote about the gross national product in the 1920s and 30s, was there a measure of GNP that he could say the GNP of England has gone up 10% and France has gone up 8% in the 1930s? No. There were no measures, there were no empirical measures of GNP in the interwar years. They were first created by Simon Kuznets, K-U-Z-N-E-T-S, who's a professor at Harvard. He developed the first empirical measures of GNP. Okay, next, once you've got the GNP as a general measure, so you've measured then the wealth of nations. That is, Smith talked about it, but Keynes, even in the 1930s, nobody had measured this. This is new stuff. Okay, after you then have a measure, you put all this stuff together, then what's the next logical thing to say? What are the causal dynamics? What are the causes and the consequences of GNP? And this has been a serious industry among economists. So just when I taught at Harvard, I was right next to I lived next door to Kuznets and got to know some other people. Another was Leontiev. Okay, Leontiev's a Russian, and he really developed input-output analysis. And I'm putting that again on the board today because I've been emailing with two new people in Beijing and in China, and one in Beijing, one in another place in China. They're using Leontiev's input-output analysis in China to try to analyze the environmentalism and how much in the environmental activities of making less smoke, less pollution, how much that will affect the rest of the Chinese economy. Okay, so the point, so basically, with Leontiev, with a bunch of others at the University of Pennsylvania, the models of the economy, the big GNP models, have over 1,000 equations. Okay, so what I'm showing is not, just pie in the sky. This is what economists are doing for the GNP now. So I'm saying, no, we don't have the data, we don't have the people who have modeled this for globalization and for all these other things, but in the next 20, 30 years, you will be doing this. Or you'll be reading with people, your peers will be doing this kind of stuff, is my suggestion. It's happening now in part on a smaller scale. It's not, we don't have data to do this comprehensively and comparatively for the whole world now, but this is happening. Okay, so that's why I'm laying out these boxes, these categories, these relations, to think about them at least conceptually, and then if we, so in the course we have a limited number of areas, and Unlike others such as Sasson and others who talk about globalization as just the United Nations, the human rights regime internationally, we want to join with the local specifics of how is this actually working, so we can get some examples, at least of cases, and sometimes some quantitative measures of how strong are these things, say, in one city or one country, even if we don't cover the whole world. Okay, so that's the general framework and why I'm laying these things out, even if we don't have them all filled in. Okay, so on to Sasson. Okay, Sasson's book is still considered the most important general book among academics for this kind of thing. The Global City. She's written she's written lots of other books. This is considered a most serious book. The others are more popular, more engaged with a particular issue. But this one, and she then, when she was here, she had several research assistants, and I was working with her with them, and she revised it. They tried to add better data, better ways of testing some of the ideas in the book. And the core sections are just about 15 pages. It's very short. It's just at the beginning. She cites no past theory. She doesn't cite Adam Smith. She doesn't cite Marx. She doesn't cite other people. She doesn't cite any evidence there. She sort of talks as if this is the way the world is. Anybody knows this? Huh?
She cites paper.
Very briefly. Okay. And very loosely. Okay. So take a look at it, and let's just go through a couple of the big points. Just 3 or 4 concepts. Why these 3 cities? Tokyo, London, and New York. What'd she call them? Global cities. Why? Why does she call them global cities, and why are they different in her terms? And they're implementing what Adam Smith said we should do. That is, they're connected. They're doing trading. They've got Wall Street. So her major example is Wall Street. That we have the economy is connected from Wall Street to Beijing to Paris to London and so forth. And so the global markets are dispersed and competitive, but there are trading centers like Wall Street. Actually, I have to tell one more story. I just learned this in the last year or so. Wall Street used to have, a gong and all these traders with their little wild outfits, and they'd be up there holding their fingers and go, I'll buy, 200 million of this, I'll sell it, all that stuff. Are they still there? No. Who replaced them?
Machine.
Yeah, a machine. Fancy programming, ability to exchange this stuff, but who was the main person? There were really 2 people. And the person who really was the leader was one woman who was a PhD student at the University of Chicago. And she and her husband, he was the programmer. She had the ideas of how to put this together. And so she went to visit the New York Stock Exchange and said she'd like to talk to the people. She said, oh, no, you can't come on the floor. You're a woman. No women allowed. You divert the trading processes. So she then kept working on it at home and so forth. She then got some banks together. She had an idea of how to work this work. She bought the San Francisco Stock Exchange. Then, after she had that, she went back to New York. She got some of the big banks to say, yeah, well, we'll potentially loan you the money. And she bought the New York Stock Exchange. Yes. Okay. And no longer do you have all those traders. And the same kind of thing has happened around the world. Okay, so the USC market can even apply to the core of the USC, to Wall Street. And it can be 1 or 2 Chicago economists who transformed all the trend. Okay, that's the trading part. And I cite that because it does not fit another key element of what Sasson is talking about, which is, what is there about corporations which are still found in Wall Street or in Tokyo or London? What does she call them? Her term again, because it's a powerful label. But what does she call them, and what is there about the importance of, let's say, the key aspects of corporations which are still there? Okay. She calls them command centers. The corporations, but who is the command center of General Motors or AT&T? Is it the average person who's a programmer, the person on the production? No, I mean it's the very top people. I mean the president, the chairman of the board, I mean very top people, the finance director, and so forth. And she then, to simplify a bit, she says, we have these people at the top and they gravitate toward, either they move there or they're actively involved with people in the biggest global cities. And General Motors headquarters is, I think it's now officially in New York. I mean, there's a big building in Detroit. But the top people are more actively, but for many other corporations, global corporations, their command centers are in the big, that is, she sees these as the global core. Okay, but then we're now getting to her more controversial parts of what about the other pieces of the corporation. Okay, so she talks about, in the past they look like this. What has happened? The middle managers, who may be the directors of General Motors in Kansas City or Waco, Texas, or a place they get smaller and smaller and less paid because they don't make global decisions. They're making local, regional decisions. Whereas the global decisions are really made up here. Then down here we have the workers. But the main thing that she focuses on is the disparity between these middle managers and the regional corporations and the importance of them, which are really going down, and the top people who are in her case, Manhattan. Do they get paid more if they're in Manhattan? Yes. Lots more? Yes. Okay, so this is her theory of income inequality. Why are they paid more?
There's I think she argues that there's essentially two things going on. One's like you're describing, there's a concentration of these upper management positions, and so since you have to be more highly specialized, there's also more concentration of wealth. Plus to live in these hyper-connected cities. But at the same time, there's a downgrading of all of the middle management positions into kind of more of the service sectors.
You've got a little bit and a little maybe too much, but not the core. You don't have the core idea. Everything you said is right. It's in her book. But I'm pressing you on this because she goes over it a little bit too fast. It's very brief. And I'm trying to make it more clear and more logical for you, as well as disagreeing with some of it and trying to show you why. Anybody else? Why do the top people get paid so much more? That's a simple question. And or more generally, which top people? Not all the top people are paid more necessarily. And then if we move to specific jobs and in other cities, why are some people paid more or more valued say in India, there's one city that's really, I'm not pronouncing it, it begins with H. Hyderabad, is that how you pronounce it? Okay. And there's a couple of cities in China that like that. All right. In that sense, I'm giving you hints. The metaphor, the world is flat, is her answer. And the metaphor of the world is flat comes from where? Does it come from Marx or from Adam Smith? Adam Smith. So her key argument of why are the top Wall Street people paid more is pure Adam Smith.
Wasn't it Thomas Friedman?
A little bit louder?
Didn't you say it was Thomas Friedman who said the earth is flat?
Yes. I mean, both. I mean, Friedman's the world is flat is pure Adam Smith. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same idea, the same argument. The world is flat. The extent of the market is global. And therefore, because they have more connections, because they are making decisions for General Motors in Mexico, in Argentina, in Italy, in China, as well as in the U.S., they get paid more. Similarly, they work with. Okay, we're getting the 3 or 4 concepts which he introduces here. So we got. Why are the top people paid more? Then what happens to if the middle managers are going down, who is making those decisions that the middle managers used to make 20, 30 years ago? And who's getting paid to do them? The top managers are very small in number, so it's not them. But who do they go to get the kind of information that they used to get, say, in a meeting? If you bring in the 20 top middle managers from Kansas City and Santa Fe or whatever, where you have to take General Motors as an example. You bring them all together. You have a national meeting of them, and then you say how many SUVs are we going to build? What are we going to do about the etc. If that was the past, what has replaced that is these middle managers get less important in following at least the theory of Sasson here.
Yeah, they outsource the service centers.
Yes, they outsource, so they contract out many more of the critical services that used to be provided by the middle managers. And who are the people who do this? What's a name or a label for them in Sasson's interpretation here? She did not create this. This is a standard census category.
Specialized service groups?
Almost.
Producer service providers. Producer service providers.
Yeah. If no one else has it, we have an answer in the front row.
Consultants.
Sorry?
Consultants?
Yes, but what kind of consultants? That is, you can have a consultant that, that H&R Block is a consultant in a sense. They do tax preparation for poor people, basically, average folks. Are you talking about them? No. We're talking about special kinds of consultants that do very high-level work, not for citizens, not for you and me. They're consultants who consult with big corporations. Producers, and what are they? The name for them is producer services. So the producer service, the big obvious examples are law, accounting, certain financial services, marketing, advertising. Okay, these are then provided by advertising firms, by marketing firms, by law firms, by accounting firms, and they also then have global staffs. So if you're the chairman, or you say you're the president of General Motors, you say I want to sell SUVs in Thailand. What regulations do I need to build into the SUV? What laws are there in Thailand? And so you can call the international accounting firms, the international law firms, and say, give me a report tomorrow. Okay, to be able to do that, you've got to have an accounting firm and a law firm that has specialists on Thailand. Okay, so you have the emergence and the reinforcement in some cities of producer services more than in other cities. And just for the record, Chicago, I think, is higher, maybe even in absolute numbers, but certainly in proportion to the labor force. Chicago is very, very high in these producer services. But certainly Tokyo, London, and New York are higher still. And so this is a narrow technical reason that the command centers want to be in the global cities because the producer services are located there. And they want to talk in person, ideally. So Sassen, still, she's got this element of personal contact, but it's not with the middle managers, it's not with the unions, it's not with the workers, it's with the heads of the producer services. So she wants a very cozy, high-level conversation with people who are at the top levels and have them have this information, you know, right there. I mean, that's her model of how this works around Wall Street. She also is a critic of this stuff. That is, on a normative level, she's not very much in the book, but she's close to the people who are saying, you know, we want to occupy Wall Street because the top 1% is getting too much. And she's sympathetic to that kind of argument, but she's trying to elaborate some of the specifics. Okay. And this comes out in her critique of the lifestyle of these very affluent people here. What does she say about them? Go ahead.
About the affluent?
Yes.
Well, the gentrification.
Gentrification is part of that kind of discussion normally. She doesn't go into that here, but others have. What else? And these are people who may live on the Upper East Side in New York. They have lots of money. They may have, you know, they may have other homes in other cities. But how do they live in their main place nearby Wall Street? Let's say, not literally in Wall Street in the South, but up on, you know, in their homes. Upper East Side is the classic area where amenities are located. Who do they want to make life better for them? How will they spend their money? Yes?
Entertainment.
Okay, entertainment, but more specifically, who entertains them personally? Who makes them better served?
Luxury goods and services.
Yes, luxury goods and service sector, but that's more what you, okay, so yes, I mean, that's part of it. But, so they may buy a big fancy limousine, but then how about a person who provides the service? You need a chauffeur. Okay. How about better food? You need either within your own kitchen or you go to a shop which provides, you know, very elegant cakes, cookies, pastry, and things like this. So you have more demand for very high-end services. And are these provided by blue-collar workers in the Bronx? No. These tend to be people who immigrate to New York from the Caribbean, from Latin America, from Eastern Europe. And are they paid high or low?
No.
Low wages. Okay, so this is her explanation of why income inequality should grow in places that are more global. Because the lifestyle, okay, and then the detail is, there's more detail if you look at her chapter called Consumption. And you have to smile at that title because there's nothing about consumption as a decision in the chapter. She said, if you work on Wall Street and you're one of these people, you've got to have a chauffeur, you've got to have nannies to take care of your children, you've got to have You've got to have, you have home delivery of food, you know, at 24 hours a day. So you got to have an extra driver who picks us up. You got to have people who are cooking for you day and night and who are making very special things. So those are the things which you must have. What if you're, say, Jerry Brown is governor of California. When he was elected governor, that is, when he was elected governor of California, did he live that way? He refused to live in the governor's mansion. He said, I'm a modest guy. He'd studied Eastern religion. He was used to self-abnegation, you know, very limited lifestyle in terms of very low spending. And so he really carried that with him. Now, I'm just citing him, and there are more people doing this today than there were. But I mean, it comes from the late 60s. It's a blending of the bohemian and the bourgeois, which we'll talk about as cultural stuff, but as we proceed. But basically, there are lots of people today who say that Wall Street conspicuous consumption is immoral, wrong. This is the 1%, and we're going to, stay in this park and demonstrate against them. This is bad stuff. Okay, so that and you have major corporations today, major U.S. corporations, see that many of the graduates, especially of elite colleges, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Chicago, people like you don't want to live that lifestyle. They don't want to have, and many of them want to say, okay, I'll work for a big corporation, Google, whatever, for a year or two. Then I want to take 2 years off and go and work in rural India and help the disadvantaged because it's the moral thing to do. Or I want to be a doctor and I'll go to Africa for a year and practice medicine and help the disadvantaged. Doctors Without Borders. You've got these things, and American corporations are recognizing this, and they're saying, you can have a year or two off on leave and you will not lose your position of moving up within the corporation. So my point is, there are multiple dimensions of globalization. There are more people who want to be, who are influenced by, religion. People are influenced by a religious and moralistic background which change the kinds of jobs that they will take. This is big enough, say, who's the biggest producer of beef and lettuce consumption in the United States? Let's say producer. They don't consume it, but who produces it? McDonald's. Okay, McDonald's was met with protesting people who came to the McDonald's headquarters and said, we want you to follow more humane animal rights. You are buying chicken and you're buying lettuce from farmers who mistreat their animals. You have too many chickens in a small cage. You should have chickens in bigger cages and let them out sometimes and so forth, and be more humane in how you treat your chickens. You're not respecting animal rights. And the first time they came, McDonald's laughed and said, sorry, we're not interested. A year or two went by, more and more people came, they protested. McDonald's, refuses, McDonald's is killing chickens, etc., etc. And after 2 or 3 visits, a couple of years went by, McDonald's implemented high standards for beef and chicken to farmers in the unit. So McDonald's would refuse to buy beef and chicken and lettuce from farmers unless they respected animal rights. Okay, so my point is this is capitalism. Combined with protests, social movements, all this stuff is going on simultaneously. Okay, so we have a section later on in the course on social movements, and we're talking now about political parties, primary debates. These are issues as well in the parties right now. These are, okay. Okay. let me just mention briefly in terms of others who have theorized this, because Sossin does not. We won't cover this in detail here, but several of you know from other courses. I mean, some of the big names, famous paper by Adorno and Horkheimer on Hollywood. So, I mean, if Hollywood works in terms of hierarchy and, and spreading a similar kind of consumption pattern, Adorno, Horkheimer, Pierre Bourdieu, well, earlier, Veblen, Thorstein Veblen, economist here. This perspective on consumption as being driven by production, that really, you don't really make any decisions yourself. You're forced to go to the movies. And I was a student at the Frankfurt School in Germany, and I listened to Adorno. One day he said, "You people felt the boot of Hitler here. You know how bad it was during the war, you and your parents. Horkheimer and I went to America where it was worse because those people did not realize they were driving those cars with big fins, they were smoking cigarettes, they were wearing clothes that were irresponsible because those were forced on them by advertising, and the advertising was so bad and people didn't realize it, but they were more manipulated than Hitler," quote unquote. Okay, so Adorno was a very subtle, he could be very subtle, but that's an example of how crude his theory, one version of his theories, could also be. And that you have this line of capitalism in a very simplistic, crude kind of way as driving consumption. That is, the point is there is no choice for the consumer in that kind of example from Adorno. Okay, Sossin follows that, in that the Wall Street lifestyle leads you to have a nanny or two and to have a chauffeur. And I'm citing Jerry Brown as a contradiction, just to say some people say no. Okay. Okay. This element, we could say, or that is this element of Sossin, that production drives consumption, comes from this tradition of Veblen, Adorno, Bourdieu, or others who talk as well now about Hollywoodization. Ritzer is one guy. Ritzer has a couple of books on Hollywoodization and the globalization of nothing. That we all are just doing nothing because we're doing the same things that we're being told to do. And it destroys the local specificity. So Ritzer, okay. So there's a couple of other people, but those are some of them. All right. So Sossin draws on this. And I'm just saying these are she doesn't do it out of, she's not the first person to say this. She's drawing from other people who've said it a lot. But then she joins it with Marx. How does she join it with Marx? In a sense, she's saying there's class conflict between the 1% here who are earning so much and the people at the bottom, the nannies, the chauffeurs, who are earning just a little bit. And that cities like New York, as they have more global connections, generate more income inequality within. So globalization causes more income inequality. That's her controversial argument, that it is not the wealth of nations, it's the income inequality grows with globalization. So okay, that's the controversial, more original point of Sossin. Okay. The next reading, and I'm going to come back and forth with Sasan here because the next two readings are really building on and critiquing her. Xing Zhong was a master's student here from China, and she said, and she heard me talk about this and say, well, is the cause of income inequality in New York due just to nannies and French pastry? Maybe there are other things. Maybe those are tourists. Maybe they're I mean, because a lot of the chauffeurs are really driving around tourists who may come from Japan, who may come from Atlanta or Houston, and they may say, you know, I'd like to have a chauffeur for 3 days while I'm in New York, and I don't want to take those taxis in New York because they're too pushy. So will you drive me to my restaurants and stuff? Okay, so most of the chauffeurs, most of those big fancy black limousines you see in Chicago, you look, I mean, I bike around here at night. Bike around right after high schools graduate in Chicago, and you will see low-income African-American kids, 15 of them, 7 of them, driving around in black chauffeurs, with chauffeurs in big black limousines, celebrating their graduation, and they're all dressed up in their graduation clothes, and they're going to nightclubs, and then they go out, they go to the beach, they go to the lakefront, they cheer, they're drinking, they're having a great time. These are major drugs. Okay, so my point is, you don't need to be a multi-billionaire to hire a chauffeur for one night. Okay, in New York or Chicago. So I'm saying production and consumption are in part separated. Okay. And so what I said the first week as well, remember multi-causality. Maybe producer services, maybe income, maybe consumption patterns for limousines are driving this. Maybe it's other things. How can we tell? So what she did, what Xing Zhong did in her master's degree was not to study New York, but to study every metro area in the U.S. She got data. She worked with Jim Heckman, with some top economists here. They got the best economic data, some of the best models, and specified, okay, what are the drivers of income inequality? Took the Sassen variable. Why do some metro areas have more income inequality, others have less? And how much is explained by the 3 factors that Sassen stressed, plus 15 other things which we can include from most economic research, which is discussed income inequality, which is unrelated potentially to Sassen. Crime, ethnicity, income, education, I mean, that basic standard variable. Okay, 3 measures of globalization, migration, having more people who migrate to the metro area from somewhere internationally. Foreign direct investment. If Chinese or Swiss investors or Swiss companies, Swiss banks invest in Houston more than they do in Waco, Texas, Houston gets a higher score than does Waco. Does that lead to more income inequality? The answer is, at least it's associated with. So having more immigrants from abroad is related to more income inequality. Having more foreign direct investment is related to income inequality. The third, does this work through producer services and maybe the command center's idea? 0. Insignificant. That devastated Sassen. Okay. So she's listed as a co-author, but she didn't want to talk about this stuff. Okay. Then we had a PhD by Jerome van der Waals, the last reading in the section, in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And Sassen is Dutch, as I said. And the Dutch are really very, I mean, she's a very visible, dramatic export of Dutch social science, and the Dutch are all sort of critiquing her. And he really takes us a lot further. And so we had on the committee, I was on the PhD committee, and we had via Skype. So we had the top guy who published a paper called "What's Wrong with Why Sassen is Wrong." He's an English economic geographer, and his basic argument was, Sassen may be right for New York, but she's wrong for London because we don't have these low-income people who get poorer because of the rich people. Why not? Because London, and so he did several empirical studies of this, of showing different neighborhoods, income changes over time. Basically because England has a stronger welfare state. They have more generous unemployment insurance, they have more generous health insurance, they have more generous housing allowances, especially if you're low income or unemployed, than they do in New York. So in New York, unemployment can go up and down, wages can go up and down, and we have there's higher income inequality in New York than in London. But most important, the driver, that is so his basic conclusion was globalization increases the income of everybody in London, the rich and the poor. The poor get richer and the rich get richer in London, whereas in New York, not so. The middle end, that is especially got business cycles and the like added to it. Okay, so Jerome van der Walle then studies this internationally with reviewing this past data, then he analyzes Dutch cities. And he finds again that Sassen was wrong in that the producer services did not have that effect. What did he find? So I won't go into detail, but take a look. I mean, his basic finding is closer to Trump. That is, the Dutch in general are very, very politically correct. They're very tolerant. They never criticize immigrants and so forth. But if you ask them very delicate questions, would you be a little more comfortable if you had a Dutch person working in your office? That things sort of like that, and then so he gets scores for different Dutch cities, and he basically finds that and he was at Rotterdam, which is not Amsterdam. So Amsterdam is super open, super tolerant, sort of bohemian lifestyle. Rotterdam is a little less so, sort of. Anyway, the point is there are differences even among the Dutch cities, and what was the major cause that he found when he did again. Sassen does not do what we call multiple regression. I mean, she doesn't do multi-causal analysis. She just looks at, one thing related to something else without controlling other factors. So when I put a little path diagram on the board last time, if multi-causality we can show like this, if we have, say, income inequality, what are the drivers? The general point I'm making, of course, is most of life is multi-causal. And if you don't test for it, you may be committing spuriousness. Okay, so what Jerome van der Walle did was measure a bunch of other things, and he found that again, producer services when it was insignificant, but what did he find was the strongest driver of income inequality across the Dutch cities? Less tolerance of immigrants, close to Trump and to this is the biggest issue in European politics today. How to treat immigrants in European countries. Okay, so I will stop there and let's have a little discussion. We'll continue. So read some of this and we'll continue with variations of this next time. But questions now, comments, including things that that may just seem confusing. Yes.
Yeah, one thought I had.
Yeah, tell us your name. You're Brazil and Atlanta and Berkeley.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that combination. Yeah.
Guilherme.
How do you spell it?
It's Guilherme.
Okay, so anglicizing a bit, sort of Guilherme.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah,
Right.
Americans can't pronounce the L.
Right. Okay.
But I forget if it was Sassen or one of the earlier authors. I was trying to look for the note, but essentially it was the idea that this kind of specialized upper management, people that are kind of accumulating wealth or are in these kind of control centers regarding where they're spending their money. And it isn't necessarily localized anymore, but it's kind of crossing borders. To what effect is that having on you know, the kind of infrastructure, or like, I think about, you know, cutting taxes and like, you know, kind of holding Amazon accountable, and like these kind of bigger corporations, and how they're not like really investing in the U.S. To what kind of effect does that have on like, you know, lower income brackets and their opportunities, or like even city infrastructures?
Okay, and that's a very big question. And just to answer narrowly, I think, at least in terms of SASA, and certainly in these pages, the simple answer is she doesn't address that. What she does address is, you know, later, and she addresses it briefly. I mean, what she does address in this section is why is New York increasing its income inequality, and her answer there is the nannies and the chauffeurs. And they come, I mean, you're from Latin America, they come especially from Latin America and the Caribbean. So she's using them not to try to explain the investment of corporations so much as the lifestyle, but she doesn't include choice by the rich people. She says if you're working on Wall Street, you've got to do this. You've got to have a chauffeur, you've got to have nannies and so forth, and you've got to spend, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and those will require these low-income persons to support your lifestyle. And that's basically her base. I mean, so you're going beyond, and those are other interesting, bigger questions, but at least, I mean, the simple answer is they're not a central part of what she's talking about. Okay. So I'd say we can come back and maybe try to deal with them one by one as we go in later sections of the course, but for now that's the quick answer. If there's someone else on the readings on this reading list, maybe remind me of that. But I think you're probably talking about readings from elsewhere. Okay. Other comments, questions? You're looking a little bit. Yes. Yeah. You're turning a look. Yeah. With a reddish sweater on, maroon sweater. Yes. You're looking a little bit quizzical, let's say. Yes, you don't have to look behind. What's in your reaction to what we're talking about?
I guess it's kind of a lot to process at the moment. I think after class I'll probably have to go back and look at the readings with this new framing from your perspective. I feel like I initially...
This is 90% of this is not my perspective. I'm trying to introduce the readings for the most part now. Wednesday we'll reinterpret them a little more.
Yeah, I think it's, so going through the readings, I think it's sometimes hard to know exactly what to get out of it, but then using the frameworks that you read at the board, it makes it a lot easier to conceptualize, so going back and looking at it again would be really helpful.
What's your take on it? What will you report?
I thought the discussion of globalization and effects of it were interesting things. I come from New York, so like basically compared to the city, you see very different socioeconomic status. So I think like it's good to expand on like why that could be important more than that.
And these are most of what I said, as well as the other things that we heard from elsewhere, are very hot New York City political and civic and public newsletter, social media, debating issues. I mean, New Yorkers fight a lot about process stuff, and they talk about it a lot. It's not as if this is secret or hidden or and the fact that Amazon first chose it and then said, you know, this is too much. We don't want to be involved with these debates. And pull out. It illustrates the degree to which that is. These are difficult, controversial issues, and they're not just New York. What's your reaction? Yes, please.
Well, I come from a very rural urbanization is just very foreign to me.
Urbanization is what?
Foreign to me.
Farm, okay. All right, well, we're at the end of the session. We'll continue this.